10 terrifying true scary stories that will haunt you. These aren't just stories, they're real nightmares. What if the terrifying things we hear at night aren't just figments of imagination, but true, chilling experiences? In the next few minutes, you'll hear 10 bone-chilling, spine-tingling true horror stories that will leave you questioning everything. Stick around till the end, because the last one will haunt you long after the video is over. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets in the night. The path ahead was narrow, barely visible beneath the thick fog. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam flickering as if struggling against the dark. Every step felt heavier. The ground beneath my boots seemed to shift with each movement. It was supposed to be a simple hike, just a quick walk to clear my mind. But the further I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees were tall, their shadows stretching like fingers across the dirt. And the air, it felt thick, oppressive. My heartbeat quickened. Something was wrong. I paused, scanning the darkness. Nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A rustle in the bushes made me freeze. A rabbit, maybe? No. The sound was too deliberate. Too slow. I took a step forward, then another. Then, there was something else. A faint glow in the distance. Curiosity pulled me toward it. I approached cautiously, every nerve on edge. The glow grew brighter as I neared. I stepped through the trees and came to a small clearing. A figure stood in the center, its back to me. Tall. Thin. Its silhouette was almost human, but something was off. The glow came from a small fire, flickering in the wind. But the figure didn't move. It was as if it was waiting. For me. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy. The figure slowly turned its head. I could see its face now. It was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes. The skin hung loose around its jaw, like it was too big for its face. A soft voice echoed in my mind. You shouldn't have come. I stepped back, but my foot caught on a rock. I fell, my flashlight spinning away from me. For a moment, everything was black. Then I heard it. A sound like a breath. Slow. Deep. I looked up. The figure was closer now. Closer than I could have imagined. The glow around it had faded, but I could still see its eyes. They were dark. Empty. The air felt colder now, freezing against my skin. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short gasps. But the figure was blocking my way. It reached out, its fingers long and twisted. You shouldn't have come. It whispered again. And then, the world went dark. I woke up in complete silence. The fog was gone. The forest, too. I was lying on cold stone. The air felt sterile, unnatural. I rubbed my eyes, disoriented. Where was I? I tried to sit up, but the space was cramped. Walls. Hard, cold walls. It looked like a small, empty room. I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. How did I get here? My body felt heavy, like I had been asleep for hours. Then a sound. A soft scrape. I turned my head. The door was cracked open. I didn't know if I should go through. I stood up, my legs wobbling beneath me. I took a step forward, then another. The hallway outside was dark, stretching endlessly in both directions. A low hum filled the air, like the buzzing of electricity. I followed the sound. It was coming from the left. The further I walked, the more I noticed the strange marks on the walls. Scratches. Deep, jagged gouges. Something had clawed at the stone. The humming grew louder. I turned the corner. And froze. In front of me was a room. It was a laboratory. Glass vials, strange instruments. And in the center of the room, a large metal table. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I saw the figure again. It was sitting at the table. It wasn't standing this time. But it was unmistakably the same. Its hollow eyes stared directly at me. It didn't move. But I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. It spoke again, but this time, The voice wasn't in my mind. It was real. You're not supposed to be here. I stumbled backward. My breath caught in my throat. And that's when I noticed the others. There were more figures, lying in strange positions, hooked up to machines. Each one was pale. Lifeless. But their eyes, they were wide open, staring blankly into nothing. The air grew colder still. The humming had turned into a low growl. I looked at the door behind me. It was shut now. There was no way out. The figure stood slowly, its joints cracking as it moved. It took one step toward me. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. You were never meant to leave, it whispered. The door behind me slammed shut. And I heard the unmistakable sound of locks turning. My heart pounded in my chest. I backed away, but the room felt smaller now. The walls seemed to close in around me. I was trapped. The figure took another step, its eyes never leaving mine. It reached out with a twisted hand. I didn't know what it wanted. I didn't want to find out. I turned toward the far wall, looking for any escape. There was a vent. Just big enough for me to crawl through, I hoped. I rushed toward it, my fingers brushing against the cold, rough stone. The figure moved closer, its footsteps unnervingly silent. I yanked at the vent cover. It came loose with a metallic screech. My heart skipped. I squeezed my body through, barely fitting. The walls were narrow, the air stale and thick with dust. I tried not to panic, pushing myself forward. But the humming sound, the growl, followed me. It was louder now, shaking the very ground beneath me. Suddenly, the vent beneath me shifted. I lost my balance, falling onto hard, uneven ground. I landed with a thud, my flashlight scattering across the floor. Darkness consumed me. I fumbled around, grabbing at the flashlight, desperately clicking the button. It blinked to life, illuminating a new space. A long, narrow hallway. But this place, it felt different. The walls were smoother, almost too perfect. I stood up, trying to make sense of where I was. Then I heard it, footsteps, just behind me. I spun around. The figure. It was standing at the far end of the hallway. But there was something else, something worse. The other figures, the ones I'd seen in the laboratory, were here too. They stood, stiff and unmoving. Their eyes fixed on me. The room grew colder, my breath visible in the air. I turned back toward the hallway and ran. I had no plan. I just had to get away. My footsteps echoed in the silence. But then, something blocked my path. A door. I threw myself at it, slamming my shoulder into the cold wood. It didn't budge. Behind me, the growl intensified. I slammed into the door again. And again. Finally, it gave way. I stumbled through. And found myself outside. The air hit me like a slap. The cold night sky stretched above, endless and empty. But when I looked back, the door had vanished. There was no sign of the building. No trace of the hallway. Just the forest. The same forest I had been in before. But the trees seemed different. Their shadows deeper. Their whispers louder. And then I heard it. That voice. You were never meant to leave. It echoed through the trees, the words lingering in my ears. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, until the world blurred around me. But the forest, it never ended. The shadows were always there. And the growl. It never stopped. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs aching. But the forest stretched on, endless, suffocating. The trees seemed to lean toward me, as if they were watching, waiting. My mind was spinning. Every step felt like it led me in circles, deeper into the woods. I couldn't remember where I had started. The familiar path was gone. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root. I hit the ground hard, the earth scraping against my skin. I tried to stand, but something was different. The air was heavier. Thicker. I couldn't breathe. I glanced around, trying to steady myself, but the forest seemed to distort around me. The trees were too tall. Too close. The whispers had returned, louder now. They slithered around me, almost as if they were inside my mind. I felt their coldness creeping in. And then I saw it. A figure. It wasn't like the others. It was smaller, hunched over, its limbs twisted unnaturally. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. It stared at me, its expression blank. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed. The whispers intensified. And then the figure, it smiled. A wide, jagged grin that stretched too far across its face. I felt a sudden pressure, as if something was pushing down on me. I gasped, feeling the air sucked from my lungs. The figure stepped closer, its smile widening. Its eyes locked onto mine. "You're still here," it said, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing longer, darker. And then I saw them. Hundreds of them. Figures, emerging from the trees, their eyes glowing. The whispering grew louder. It was a cacophony now, a chorus of voices, all speaking the same words. "You were never meant to leave." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was surrounded. The figures moved closer, their hands outstretched, their eyes hungry. I felt the cold, clammy touch of one of them against my arm. A jolt of ice ran through me. The forest was no longer just a place. It was alive. And it was closing in. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The figures were everywhere now. Touching me. Pulling me. Dragging me into the darkness. And in that moment I understood. I had never left. I had never truly escaped. The forest, it had always been with me. I was being pulled deeper, the cold hands tightening their grip around my arms and legs. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, each step dragging me further into its grasp. The whispers were deafening now, 1,000 voices, all calling my name. I couldn't focus. My mind was shattering. They weren't just figures anymore. They were a part of the forest. Roots, branches, eyes, everything was part of it. I struggled against them, my body desperate for freedom. But the harder I fought, the tighter their grip became. Their hands felt like ice, colder than anything I had ever experienced. I felt my breath grow shallow, the pressure on my chest increasing. "You were never meant to leave," they chanted, the words blending into one. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The forest was suffocating me. And then I saw something through the mass of figures, a light. A flicker. It was distant, but it was there. It wasn't like the eerie glow from before. This was different. Hope surged through me. I had to reach it. I didn't know what it was, but I had to try. With every ounce of energy, I broke free from their grasp, stumbling toward the light. The figures screamed, their voices growing desperate, angry. The air became colder, heavier. But I kept running. I could feel the ground beneath me changing, the soft earth turning to cold stone. I didn't dare look back. The light was getting brighter now, closer. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. I reached the light and I crashed into it. Everything went white. I was no longer in the forest. I was somewhere else. The air was crisp, fresh. I could breathe again. But the feeling in my chest wasn't relief. It was dread. I looked around. I was in an old, decrepit building. The walls were covered in strange symbols, like some kind of ritualistic writing. The floor was cracked, debris scattered everywhere. I took a step forward, only to freeze. In front of me, on a stone altar, lay the same figure I had seen in the forest. The same hollow eyes, the same twisted, too wide grin. It was me. I stumbled back, my body going cold. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. But the figure on the altar slowly rose. Its eyes locked onto mine. "You were never meant to leave," it whispered, its voice a twisted reflection of my own. And then I understood. I had never left. I had never escaped. The forest, it was always there. And so was the figure. It had always been me. And now, there was no escape. I stood frozen, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure, myself, slowly stepped down from the altar, its movements jerky, unnatural. Its eyes, hollow and empty, bore into me, unblinking, as if it could see straight through me. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, my breath shallow. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing tighter with each passing second. I wanted to scream, but my mouth felt sewn shut. The figure didn't speak, but it didn't need to. Its smile said it all. "You were never meant to leave," it whispered again, though I wasn't sure if it was speaking aloud or inside my mind. I staggered backward, stumbling over the debris on the floor. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols, pulsating, as if alive. The air had turned thick again, but this time it wasn't just the chill. It felt heavy with something else. Something ancient. The figure was coming closer. Closer than I could ever run. I backed into a wall, the cold stone pressing against my spine. My throat tightened. My mind screamed for me to do something. Anything. But I was paralyzed. The figure's grin stretched impossibly wide, its face distorting, twisting in ways no human face ever should. It reached out its hand, fingers long and cracked, the skin stretched thin. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure's smile never wavered. I felt the pull, the weight of its presence bearing down on me. Suddenly, I was no longer in control of my own body. It wasn't just the figure's touch. Something else, something inside me shifted. The light in the room flickered, casting deep shadows, making the figure's face even more grotesque, more monstrous. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Its grip was like ice, cold beyond belief. And then, I heard it. A voice. A deep, hollow echo of my own. "It's too late now. You've always been here." The words reverberated through my mind, sinking deeper, spreading through every thought. I felt the walls pressing in closer, the weight of them suffocating me. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sight of the figure. But when I opened them again, I was back in the forest. The fog was thick once more, swirling around me. The trees stretched far above, their twisted branches reaching toward me like the fingers of the damned. I was still in the forest. Still trapped. I tried to run, but it was no use. The forest had me in its grip. The whispers had returned, louder now, almost deafening. I turned, desperate to escape, but the figure, myself, was standing right in front of me. It was no longer an echo. No longer a distant image. It was real. "You were never meant to leave," it said one final time, its voice a jagged rasp. And in that moment I understood. The forest was not a place. It was a trap. A prison. And I was never meant to leave. I was always meant to stay. I felt the weight of the words crash into me, suffocating all hope. The figure, my twisted reflection, stepped forward, its movements slower now, as if savoring my terror. Its eyes burned with a cold emptiness, the same emptiness I could feel growing inside me. My legs were frozen, my body trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't breathe. The whispers were louder now. The trees themselves seemed to hum with them, like the very forest was alive, feeding off my fear. "You were never meant to leave," the figure repeated, its voice more insistent, more hollow. "You belong here. Just like the others." I wanted to scream, to run, to fight. But every movement felt sluggish, every thought clouded by the sheer weight of its presence. The forest, the darkness, had swallowed everything. There was no escape, no way out. I looked around, frantic, searching for any hint of light, any trace of a way out. But the fog was thick, choking, swirling around me, suffocating every shred of hope. The figure was closer now, its smile widening. Its grin was grotesque, as though it had stretched beyond the limits of its face. "You'll join us soon," it whispered, its voice sliding into my mind like poison. "You're already part of it, whether you know it or not." I tried to turn, to run, but my body was no longer mine to command. The ground beneath me felt like it was shifting. The earth seemed to tremble, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing, watching. And then, the trees, they moved. The branches bent and twisted in unnatural directions, their gnarled limbs reaching down to snag my arms, my legs. I screamed, but no sound came out. The branches closed around me, squeezing tight, pulling me back toward the figure. It stepped closer, its grin growing wider still, its eyes filling with something darker. Something more hungry. "Welcome home," it said, its voice laced with satisfaction. The ground beneath me cracked open with a sickening sound. A deep, dark pit appeared, swallowing the earth whole. I was being dragged toward it, pulled into the darkness. I fought, struggling with every ounce of strength, but it was useless. My body wasn't mine to control anymore. It was as if the forest had taken over, binding me to its will, binding me to the curse that had claimed so many others. The figure reached out, its hand brushing against my cheek. It felt cold, colder than anything I had ever known, colder than the deepest winter. Its voice was a whisper now, almost gentle. "You're not the first. And you won't be the last." And then, it all went black. I woke up to a strange, suffocating silence. The fog was gone. The forest was gone. But the air felt wrong, thick with something I couldn't explain. I was standing in the clearing again, the same place where it had all begun. The trees loomed, silent and still. The ground beneath me felt too solid, too still, like it had never moved, never shifted. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. And then I saw them. Hundreds of figures, standing in the shadows. All of them were familiar. All of them were twisted versions of myself. Their hollow eyes stared back at me, empty and cold. They were waiting. "Welcome back," one of them whispered, stepping forward. The smile, it was mine. And I realized then, there was no escaping this. The forest had claimed me, just like it had claimed all the others. I was now one of them. One of the lost souls, wandering the endless dark. And there would be no end. Just the whispers, the endless whispers, forever. I was never meant to leave. I was never meant to escape. The air was suffocating now, thick with the presence of those around me. The figures, my twisted, hollow selves, were closer than before. Their eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something stir inside me, a deep, gnawing emptiness. Their grins stretched wider. The shadows around us deepened, swallowing the light, leaving nothing but the cold, suffocating void. I tried to move, but my legs felt frozen to the ground. I could feel the forest pulse beneath me, as if it was alive, breathing with me, feeding off me. Every figure, every twisted reflection of myself, began to step forward, one by one. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. "You were always one of us," they whispered in unison, their voices a low, eerie hum that vibrated through the air. I wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped in my throat, stifled by the overwhelming presence of the forest, the figures. I could feel my sanity slipping, the edges of my mind becoming blurry, as though something was slowly erasing me, piece by piece. "It's too late now," the one closest to me said, its voice a mockery of my own. "You've crossed the threshold. You'll never leave again." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled backward, my mind racing, but there was nowhere to go. The figures were closing in around me, surrounding me in an impenetrable circle. The forest pressed in, its branches reaching toward me like skeletal hands. The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping rapidly. I was suffocating, drowning in the darkness. "You will be forgotten," another one of them whispered, its voice cruel and detached. "You'll fade into the shadows, just like all the others." The pit in my stomach deepened. I could feel my body weakening, like something was draining me, something that had always been there, waiting. And then I saw it, just beyond the circle of figures. A flicker of light, distant and faint, like a star in a blackened sky. Something inside me, some tiny, fading spark of hope, urged me to move, to reach for that light. I took a step toward it, but the figures moved faster. One of them grabbed my arm, its fingers digging into my skin like claws. "Where do you think you're going?" it hissed, its breath cold against my ear. I fought against it, pulling, struggling, but the grip only tightened. My vision blurred. The light seemed to fade further away with every passing second, like a mirage slipping from my reach. You belong here, they said, their voices rising in a chorus, drowning out everything else. You're already part of the forest. Forever. The words seeped into my mind, filling every corner, until they were all I could think. There was no escape. No way out. The figures, my twisted reflections, began to surround me, their grins widening, their eyes glowing brighter with each passing moment. I could feel my essence draining, my sense of self slipping away, becoming part of the forest, becoming part of them. And then, all at once, everything went silent. The figures vanished. The forest was still. I was alone. For a brief, fleeting moment, there was peace. But I knew it wouldn't last. I looked around, and realized I was still in the forest. I was still trapped. Still part of it. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had only quieted. And in the distance, I could hear the faintest echo of footsteps. Mine. But they weren't mine anymore. I had become just another shadow, just another whisper in the endless, suffocating dark. The forest had claimed me. And I had become it. The silence was no longer comforting. It was suffocating. The forest stretched before me, infinite and endless, with no sign of the sky, no hint of the outside world. I could no longer tell where I ended and the forest began. My limbs felt heavy, almost foreign. Like I was still trying to move through a dream. I tried to call out, but the words wouldn't leave my mouth. The air was too thick, too heavy to carry sound. The whispers, though, those never stopped. They were everywhere now, surrounding me, echoing off the trees, swirling in my ears. The voices no longer felt like separate whispers. They merged, became one entity, pressing against me. You are one of us. I took a hesitant step forward, but my feet felt as if they were sinking into the soil. The earth seemed to pull at my body, urging me to stay, to root myself in the forest. I pulled back, trying to shake off the suffocating feeling of the earth's grip. But then I saw it. In the distance, faint, but unmistakable. A light. A flicker. It was the same kind of light I'd seen before, the one that had called me, the one that had made me run. It was no longer just a faint glow. It was stronger now, brighter. I felt the pull again, that desperate need to reach it, to escape this endless, choking dark. Without thinking, I started moving toward it. But the forest didn't let me go easily. As I walked, the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift and twist. The trees groaned, their branches creaking and swaying, as if they were alive, reacting to my every step. The shadows clung to me, reaching for my legs, my arms, trying to drag me back. The whispers grew louder. You can't escape, they hissed. You belong here now. You're one of us. I shoved the words away. I had to get to the light. Each step felt like I was wading through mud, my body growing more and more sluggish, weighed down by the presence of the forest. But still, I kept moving. The light was closer now. Suddenly, the earth shifted beneath me. I stumbled, the ground opening up beneath my feet like a mouth, trying to swallow me whole. My body lurched forward, but I caught myself, narrowly avoiding the jagged hole that had appeared in the earth. The light shimmered ahead, almost within reach. But then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, deep in the darkness behind me. I spun around. The figures were back. Hundreds of them, my twisted reflections, emerged from the trees, stepping into the light, their hollow eyes locked onto mine. You can't outrun it, one of them whispered, its voice like an echo of my own. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs were frozen again. The pull of the forest was too strong. The light ahead flickered again, this time dimming. It was fading. I was running out of time. I felt the figure's cold fingers brush against my back, sending a jolt of ice through me. It had been waiting, always waiting, just like all the others. I reached for the light, stretched my hand out. The figure's whisper came again, louder now, closer, as if it was right next to me. You were never meant to leave. You are already part of us. The forest seemed to respond, the trees shaking as if in agreement. And then, the light extinguished. Everything went dark. The cold, suffocating dark. I was alone again. But the whispers had returned, more intense, more urgent. You belong here. You are one of us. Forever. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. The darkness pressed in, the forest closing in on me, until there was no space left. I had no idea how long I stood there, lost in the oppressive dark, surrounded by nothing but the relentless pull of the forest. But slowly, in the distance, I saw it again. A flicker of light. A distant glow, just like before. And the whispers started again. It's time. You're home. I could no longer resist. I moved toward it. The cycle had begun again. The flicker of light drew me forward, but this time, something inside me had changed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but now they seemed distant, as if muffled by a wall I couldn't see. I was no longer running from the forest. I was drawn to it. I took a step toward the light, but my feet felt heavy, weighed down by the forest's ancient hunger. The ground seemed to shift under my weight, the roots pulling at my legs, urging me to stay, to become part of the earth. But the light, it was calling me, brighter now, closer. It wasn't the same gentle flicker as before. This time, the light was sharp, blinding, almost unbearable. I reached out toward it, my fingers trembling, feeling the air around me change. The trees groaned, their branches twisting and bending as if to warn me. But I couldn't stop. I was already too far gone. The light flickered again, and for a moment, everything was still. The whispers died down, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. And then, the light exploded, filling the space with blinding brilliance. For a second, I thought I might be free. But the instant the light touched my skin, I felt the ground beneath me give way. The air around me became thick and suffocating again. The forest screamed in my ears. The figures, my twisted reflections, surged from the shadows, rushing toward me with terrifying speed. Their faces were contorted, their eyes wide with hunger. I tried to move, but I was frozen. Trapped. The light had been a trap. The moment it touched me, I felt my essence, everything that I was, begin to unravel, like threads slipping through my fingers. You were never meant to leave. They whispered in unison, their voices wrapping around me like chains. I felt their cold hands on me, dragging me back into the depths of the darkness. I wanted to scream, but the sound was smothered by the crushing weight of the forest, by the gnawing pull that had already claimed so many before me. I was no longer sure of who I was. The line between the figures and myself had blurred. I was becoming them. I felt my body change, my form distorting, becoming something other than human, something other than what I had been. And then, in the distance, I saw something else. A faint shape, flickering just like the light had. But it wasn't bright. It was dark. It was a shadow. And it was moving toward me. The figures backed away as it neared, their eyes wide, their expressions full of fear. Not yet, one of them whispered. It's not time. The shadow was coming closer now, faster than anything else. It was a presence. A being that filled the air with its cold, oppressive weight. And as it reached me, I felt it, a deep, terrifying cold that sunk into my bones. It wasn't just cold. It was death. The shadow moved in, enveloping me, pressing against my skin, pulling me into its embrace. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't run. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the forest, the twisted trees, the hollow eyes of the figures, fading away. And then, there was nothing. Just the emptiness. And the whispers? You are never alone, they said, their voices softer now, more intimate, as if they were speaking to me from within. I had become part of the forest. I had always been part of it. And there would be no escape. Not anymore. Not ever. The darkness wrapped around me like a heavy, suffocating cloak, a silence deeper than any I had known. The cold seeped into my very bones, chilling me to the core. I tried to move, but my limbs felt like they belonged to someone else, like I was already fading away, becoming part of the shadow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Only the whispers remained, weaving through the void, their cold fingers brushing against the edges of my mind. You were always meant to stay. The words echoed, vibrating through my soul, resonating with something ancient, something primal. It wasn't the forest speaking to me anymore. It was it. The presence. The thing that had been lurking just beyond the shadows, watching, waiting. I felt it now. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just a presence. It was something older. Something older than the trees. Than the forest. Than the earth itself. And it was drawing closer. I couldn't see it. Not fully. But I could feel it, like a deep, crawling dread moving through me, threading its way through my very essence. It was familiar. Too familiar. You belonged to me now. I flinched. The voice was inside me, reverberating through my thoughts, growing louder. It wasn't just a voice. It was a force. A deep, jagged pressure built in my chest, like something was tearing me apart from the inside. I gasped for breath, but my lungs felt tight, like the air had been sucked from the space around me. My heartbeat was slow, heavy, distant. I didn't know if I was alive anymore, if I was even still me. I blinked, trying to focus, to clear the fog in my mind. But when I opened my eyes, all I saw was darkness. Yet I felt other eyes on me. Watching. Staring. Hungry. My head jerked to the side. Something had moved in the corner of my vision. A shadow. Taller than any figure I had ever seen. A looming shape that flickered in and out of existence, like a nightmare that couldn't decide if it was real or not. Come closer, it whispered, its voice a low hum that seemed to resonate in the very air around me. I wanted to scream, but the sound was caught in my throat, thick and suffocating. I reached out, instinctively, as though I were being pulled by some unseen force. My hands trembled, my fingers brushing the cold surface beneath me. Suddenly, the pressure lifted. The cold receded, but in its place, a new sensation. A pull. A tug. Like I was being drawn into something far darker, deeper than anything I had felt before. My body shifted, not with my will, but with its. The shadow moved again, closer. Closer. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a presence. A feeling. Something ancient. Something that was me. The realization hit like a physical blow. I wasn't just trapped in the forest. I had become the forest. And so had it. This wasn't just a place anymore. The forest was a living thing, alive with the memories of all those who had come before me, all those who had been drawn into its endless grip. Those voices, those whispers, they were me. I was one of them. The shadow, now almost solid, reached toward me, its tendrils curling like the branches of the trees. The ground beneath me trembled as if it were waking from a long, deep slumber. I could feel it in the air. It was waking star. And then I saw it. The true face of the darkness. The thing that had been hiding all along, waiting for me to understand. 1,000 eyes, all staring at once. 1,000 voices, all whispering the same truth. You were never meant to leave. I had become part of it. Part of the forest. The eternal cycle. The hunger. And as the shadow pulled me deeper into its endless grasp, I knew one thing for certain. There would be no end. No escape. Just the whispers. The endless whispers. Forever. You are home. And I realized, too late, that home was never meant to be a place. It was meant to be this. This darkness. This endless, suffocating void. The whispers grew louder, thick and chaotic, crashing into my mind like waves against jagged rocks. They no longer felt like distant echoes, but as if they were part of me, clawing at my very soul. You are one with us. The words slithered into my thoughts, sinking deep into my chest, making my heart race. I could feel the very ground beneath me pulse, as if it were alive, as if it was part of the hunger that had claimed me. Every inch of me was aware that I had become something else. Something I couldn't comprehend. The forest, the shadow, the cold, dark void, they were all the same now. All part of me. Part of this thing I had become. My skin felt like it was burning with the force of it, my body twisting and contorting, as though reshaping itself to fit the mold of the darkness. I could feel the forest itself tugging at me, pulling me in deeper, dragging me back into its folds. The trees were alive, not just alive, but aware of me, aware of us all. And then I saw it. A flash of movement. A figure. A face. My face. It was there, standing just beyond the shadow, emerging from the depths. But it wasn't me, not the me I once was. This was the face of something else. Something older, something twisted. Its eyes were hollow, its smile stretching far beyond the limits of what a human face should endure. The face was my face but contorted, warped, and cold with a kind of hunger that made my stomach churn. The figure moved closer. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away. I felt it then. The overwhelming pull. It reached toward me with slow, deliberate movements, the fingers long and clawed, as if to claim me once and for all. "Welcome home," the figure whispered, but it wasn't just the figure, it was the voice of the forest. The voice of the shadow. The voice of everything that had always been. The cold wrapped around me, tightening, as if the very air had become something I could no longer breathe. I tried to gasp, but there was nothing left in me, no breath, no life, just the ever-expanding emptiness that was consuming me whole. I wanted to fight, but there was nothing left to fight with. No will. No strength. I had already surrendered. I had already become one of them. And then, in the distance, I saw it again. A light. Faint. Flickering. It was the same light that had once beckoned me. The light I had chased, believing it was the escape. But now I knew. The light was false. It wasn't salvation. It was another trap, another cruel deception, like the forest itself. It was the forest, trying to pull me back into its endless cycle. I could feel it. I could feel the shadows reaching for me, pulling me closer, wanting to consume me once more. The figure, my twisted reflection, stepped closer. The smile on its face grew wider. And I realized. It wasn't me who had been trapped. I was the trap. I was the forest. And the cycle would never end. I would never end. The light faded, swallowed whole by the darkness, and the whispers came again, softer now, but unmistakable. "You will never escape. You are home now." And in that moment I knew the terrible truth. The forest didn't just take. It didn't just consume. It shaped. It transformed. I had become one of them. The forest would always be waiting, stretching its tendrils out, pulling new victims into its grasp. And now, I was a part of it. Part of the hunger. Part of the endless, suffocating dark. Forever. The weight of the realization pressed on me like a physical force. My very thoughts, my identity, everything that had once defined me, felt like it was slipping away. The forest was not just a place, it was a being. An entity that fed off fear, off despair, off the lost souls who wandered into its depths. And I had become one of those souls. I looked down at my hands, but they didn't look like my hands anymore. They were pale, almost translucent, and they seemed to flicker, like shadows struggling to exist in the light. The earth beneath me shifted, the roots of the trees curling up from the soil, crawling around my ankles, pulling me deeper into the ground. I could feel the change within me, the transformation. It wasn't painful, not in the way one would expect. It was a slow unraveling, a sinking into something vast and ancient. The forest was merging with me, becoming part of my flesh, my mind. Its whispers no longer felt like distant murmurs. They felt like my own thoughts now, a constant hum, urging me, guiding me, wrapping around every shred of who I used to be. And then I heard it. A sound I hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Footsteps. Footsteps in the distance. I turned, instinctively, hoping, praying, that it was anyone coming to help. But as I looked into the ever-deepening shadows, I saw them. Figures, barely visible, moving closer. More of them. My twisted reflections. I had heard their voices before, but now, I felt them in my bones. They weren't just ghosts, they were shadows, pieces of what I had become. The figures drew nearer, their faces twisted and wrong, their eyes empty, their mouths stretched into grins too wide to be human. They were waiting, just as I had waited. "Welcome home," they whispered, their voices mingling with the forest's. One of them stepped forward, its face a grotesque mockery of my own. It smiled, its mouth stretching further than any human face should be able to. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were locked, frozen, staring into the abyss of my own reflection. "You thought you could leave," the figure hissed, its voice like nails dragging across stone. "But you never did. You never could." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My lips were sealed, as though the forest had stolen my voice. The figure's hand reached toward me, long fingers curling like claws. It touched my shoulder, and I felt a coldness seep into my skin, deeper than any chill I had ever known. I could feel it spreading through my veins, draining me of warmth, of life. And then I realized. I had never been meant to leave. I wasn't trapped by the forest, I had become it. The light, the escape, the hope I had clung to, they were illusion star. The forest didn't want to kill me. It didn't want to imprison me. It wanted me to join it. To become part of its endless hunger, to feed the cycle, to be another whisper lost in the dark. The figures gathered around me, their eyes glowing with something deep and hollow. They were waiting, just like I had waited. Waiting for the next lost soul to wander into the grasp of the forest. Waiting for me to take my place among them. "We were all lost once," one of them said, its voice low and sorrowful. "But now we are home." I felt the last remnants of my humanity slip away, piece by piece, like sand through my fingers. My heart, my soul, everything that had once been me, was becoming one with the forest, becoming part of the endless hunger that would never cease. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A flicker of light. Not the same light that had lured me here, but something different. Something real? I hesitated. Was it a trap? Was it another illusion? But as the light pulsed softly in the distance, I felt the smallest stir of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time it was different. I took a step forward, trembling, the forest around me humming with tension. The figures didn't stop me. They just watched, their hollow eyes following my every movement. The light flickered again. Closer now. I started walking toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, the whispers louder in my ears. "You cannot escape," they hissed. "You are part of us." But this time, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The light was there, just ahead, warm and inviting. And though I knew deep down that the forest was watching, waiting for me to falter, to turn back, I took another step. And then, I vanished into the light. The darkness. The whispers. The endless cycle. It had all faded away. And for the first time since I had stepped into the forest, there was only silence. Only peace. But deep in the quiet, in the space where time no longer seemed to exist, I felt it. The pulse. The forest. It was still there. Waiting for the next soul to wander in. Waiting for the next one to join. Forever. The silence was unnerving. It was too quiet. Too peaceful. For the first time, I felt free. But the peace didn't last. It never does. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the soft, golden light that surrounded me. It wasn't harsh like before. No, this light felt warm, comforting, like the glow of a fire on a cold night. My mind, for the briefest moment, believed that I had escaped, that I had finally found my way out of the forest. But as I looked around, something felt wrong. The light, it wasn't natural. It didn't have the soft, inviting warmth of daylight. It had the cold, sterile quality of something that shouldn't exist. I turned around. The forest was still there. It had followed me. Somehow, it had found me even here. The trees loomed on the edges of my vision, their twisted forms stretching toward me, their branches scratching the air. I was still inside the forest. But now, something was different. The light was fading. Slowly at first, like the sun setting beyond the horizon. But with each passing second, it dimmed more and more, like a candle's flame dying in the wind. And in the growing darkness, I heard it again. The whispers? You cannot escape. The voices came from everywhere, swarming around me, clawing at the edges of my consciousness. I felt them pressing in, suffocating me. Their words were no longer a distant hum, they were inside my head, part of me. You belong here. Forever. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The whispers had stolen my voice. They had stolen everything. My hands trembled as I looked at them again. They were no longer human. Not fully. They were flickering, as though my very essence was being torn away, replaced by shadows. I could feel the cold creeping back into my bones. The warmth of the light was evaporating, replaced by an icy dread that spread throughout my body. I tried to move. I tried to step away from the darkness. But I couldn't. The ground beneath my feet shifted again. The earth twisted, the trees groaned in protest. Something beneath me stirred, as if it was coming alive, pulling me down into the dirt. You are one of us, the voices whispered. You always have been. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath as the weight of the forest pressed down on me. No escape. No way out. I could feel it now, the pull. The same pull that had lured me in all those months ago, that had led me into the heart of the forest, that had claimed me as one of its own. But it was different now. The pull was stronger. More urgent. I couldn't fight it anymore. The shadow that had once been a distant figure, my twisted reflection, emerged from the trees once again, its face stretched into that grotesque grin. It stepped forward, and its hand reached out to touch me. But this time, I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Its cold fingers closed around mine, and in that moment, everything inside me broke. I was no longer me. I had become the forest. I had become the shadow. I had become everything. The last thread of my humanity snapped, and the forest claimed me. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were a chorus of voices, my voice among them. They were me, and I was them. The darkness was not just a place. It was not just an existence. It was a part of me. I was part of it. And as the light faded completely, I realized with cold clarity, there was no escape. There never had been. You are home, they whispered. You are one of us. And in that moment I understood. The forest had never been a place. It was a prison. But I wasn't its prisoner. I was its keeper. Forever. The cycle would repeat. There would be more, new souls, new wanderers, drawn into the endless grip of the darkness. And I would be here, waiting, whispering, always waiting for the next soul to take its place. For in the end, there was only one truth. The forest never lets go. And now, either did I. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a part of me, pulsing with every breath I took. The shadows were my shadows now. The whispers, my whispers. They were as much a part of my soul as the pulse of the earth beneath me, as the cold, clammy grip of the trees around me. I felt it deeply, intimately. Every leaf that rustled, every branch that creaked, was like a message from the depths of the dark, reminding me that I was its eternal keeper. But even as I stood in the heart of that endless darkness, a part of me, a small, fading part, was still aware. Still trying to fight, still trying to break free. But it was hopeless. The forest had claimed me. It had taken my voice, my thoughts, my memories, and it had woven them into the very fabric of its being. The edges of my existence, the things I had once known, family, home, light, were all fading now, lost to the all-consuming dark. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, like they were inside my head, inside my soul. Come! They are coming! I didn't know who they were. But I felt a stirring. A movement. Something was shifting. The shadows seemed to ripple and stretch, reaching out toward the edges of the darkness. There was a sound, like the cracking of brittle bones, the shifting of 1,000 tiny footsteps, all at once. And then I saw them. A figure emerged from the thick of the trees, a silhouette in the dim light. Another soul. Another lost one. It stumbled forward, its eyes wide with fear, confusion. A new victim. I felt it instantly, the same pull, the same hunger, the same dark desire to draw them in. The whispers around me grew louder, feverish, as the forest began to hum with anticipation. "It's your turn now," the voices whispered in unison. "It's your turn to join." I didn't want to feel this again. I didn't want to be part of this cycle. But the hunger was insatiable. It pulled at me, down into the dirt, into the roots, into the endless night. The figure was getting closer now, its footfalls soft but desperate. It had no idea what was waiting. No idea that the forest was alive, that it had a will, a desire to claim and consume. I could hear the figure's shallow breathing. Its heartbeat. So fragile. So full of life. It was perfect. But then, I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of recognition. A flicker of the person I once was. Could it be? Could I warn them? Could I stop it? I moved. I forced myself to move, my body resisting, my limbs heavy with the weight of the forest. The shadows clung to me, my new skin, but I fought through them. I had to warn this new soul. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. There was nothing. Not even a whisper. And then, the figure, still unaware of the trap it was walking into, stepped closer. It reached out, its hand brushing against the trunk of a tree. And that's when I felt it. The forest recognized the new soul. A tremor ran through the ground. The trees creaked and groaned as if coming alive. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. The figure stopped. Its eyes widened, suddenly aware that something was wrong. It turned, looking around, a silent scream forming on its lips. But it was too late. The forest was already closing in. The trees leaned in, their branches thickening, twisting like fingers, gripping the air. The figure tried to scream, but the forest swallowed its voice. The shadows around me grew, stretching longer, deeper. And as I watched, the figure was consumed by the darkness. Swallowed whole. I didn't need to see it. I felt it. The forest had claimed another. And in that moment, I realized the cruel truth. The darkness had always known this would happen. It wasn't just a place, it was an entity alive, aware. It wasn't just hungry for souls. It was feeding off the cycle, the endless cycle of life and death, light and darkness. And I was a part of it. I had become it. The whispers around me faded. The cycle was complete. For a moment I was still. Silent. The dark, consuming void. But then I heard it. A new whisper. A voice. "You were always meant to stay." The forest was watching. Waiting. For the next one. For the next soul. For the endless hunger. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that the cycle would never end. Not for me. Not for anyone. The forest would claim them all. And I would wait. Forever. The keeper. The shadow. The hunger. Home. The air grew still, colder than before, thick with the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. The silence was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. The trees stood motionless, their twisted branches reaching up like claws, hungry for the next soul to wander into their grasp. I stood there, rooted in place, an observer and a part of it all. The forest had become me, and I had become it. And yet there was still something I couldn't shake. A whisper in the back of my mind, the faintest flicker of resistance. A memory. A flash of the person I once was. A person who believed in escape. Who believed in freedom. But the forest had stripped all that away. I heard the sound of footsteps again, soft at first, but growing louder. A new presence. A new wanderer. I turned toward the sound, my senses sharp. The figure emerged from the mist, stumbling, disoriented. It was a woman, her eyes wide with terror, her breath shallow and quick. She was lost, just like I had been. Just like we all had been. She looked around, her heart racing as the oppressive weight of the forest closed in on her. She didn't know the truth yet, the truth of what awaited her. I felt it. The forest was awakening once again. It was aware. It was alive. And it was hungry. The woman's footsteps faltered, as though she could feel the change, feel the eyes of the trees on her. Her hand reached out to touch a nearby branch, the gnarled bark cold and unforgiving beneath her fingers. And in that instant I knew. I knew she was already claimed. The whispering began. "You belong to us?" The voices murmured in unison, a chorus of the forgotten souls who had wandered into the forest before her. She froze. Her face twisted in fear. She could hear them now. Feel them. The forest was speaking to her. But she couldn't escape. She couldn't outrun the hunger that had already ensnared her. I took a step forward, and she looked at me, her eyes wide with desperation. I could see the same fear in her eyes that had once burned in mine, the fear of knowing the truth, of realizing the terrible fate she had sealed for herself. But there was no helping her. There was no saving her. I stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the trees. The forest was reclaiming its next victim. And as the darkness closed in around her, I knew what she was about to experience. The same thing I had. The same thing we all did. "You are one of us now," the voices whispered again, and I felt the familiar, cold grip of the forest wrapping around her, pulling her into its endless embrace. And I was left standing in the shadows, the keeper of the cycle. Watching. Waiting. For the next one. For the next soul to wander into the darkness. For the cycle to begin again. Forever. And as I faded into the abyss, I understood the truth. There was no escape. There was no end. The forest was not just a place. It was home. The forest had become my world. The endless shadows, the twisted trees, the deep, echoing whispers, they were no longer separate from me. They were me. I was part of the pulse beneath the ground, part of the hunger that stretched its limbs through every root and branch, part of the dark rhythm that bound everything together. And yet, amid it all, a strange kind of peace settled over me. The cycle would never end. It couldn't. The new souls would keep coming, drawn by the same strange pull that had brought me here so long ago. And I would be here, just as I had always been, waiting for them, watching them, guiding them into the dark embrace of the forest. The hunger would always demand its toll, and there would always be more. I felt it, them, the others who had been here before me. The lost, the broken. Their voices blended together, becoming one harmonious murmur that echoed in my mind. I was one of them now. One of the voices, one of the shadows. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of the person I had once been still remained. That small, fragile piece of me that longed for freedom, for light, for something beyond the darkness. But it was only a memory now. A ghost. The darkness closed in around me, soft and comforting. The whispers turned into a lullaby. I felt the weight of the forest's embrace, gentle but firm. And as I stood there, swaying with the rhythm of the shadows, I understood. The forest was not just a place. It was a living, breathing thing. A thing that fed, that grew, that claimed. It was ancient. It was hungry. And it would always find its way to the lost. I was lost once. But now, I was home. The footsteps echoed in the distance again. Another wanderer. Another soul. Their heartbeat pulsed like a fragile drum, quick and fearful, unaware of what was waiting. I could feel them, feel their desperation and confusion. But there was no escape. There never was. The forest would claim them, just as it had claimed me. And as I turned to watch the shadows stretch out, reaching toward them, I whispered into the wind. "Welcome home." The cycle would continue. And I would be here, waiting. Forever.